In December 2019, 28-year-old Jessica Taylor vanished without a trace during the peak holiday shipping season while working her route as an Amazon delivery driver, leaving behind her fully loaded van and 847 undelivered Christmas presents in an upscale gated community. Despite Amazon's sophisticated GPS tracking systems and extensive doorbell camera footage from multiple homes, Jessica had simply disappeared mid-route, as if she had stepped out of existence itself. But 3 years later, urban explorers venturing through an abandoned fulfillment warehouse on the outskirts of town would discover something that would change everything anyone thought they knew about Jessica's disappearance, revealing a truth so shocking that it would send ripples through one of the world's largest corporations and expose a web of deception that had been hiding in plain sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of December 19th had started like any other for Jessica Taylor. She arrived at the Amazon delivery station in Riverside at precisely 6:15 a.m., 15 minutes before her scheduled shift, just as she had every day for the past 2 years. Jessica was the kind of employee supervisors noticed, not because she caused problems, but because she never did. Her delivery metrics consistently ranked in the top 10% of drivers at the facility. Her customer satisfaction scores were exemplary, and she had never called in sick or missed a shift without advance notice. Marcus Chun, the station manager, would later tell investigators that Jessica had seemed perfectly normal that morning. She had completed her pre-shift safety briefing, conducted her vehicle inspection with typical thoroughness, and loaded her delivery van with the same methodical precision that had made her one of their most reliable drivers. Her route for the day was Route 447, a coveted assignment that took her through Willowbrook Estates, one of the area's most affluent neighborhoods where tips were generous and packages were rarely stolen from doorsteps. The van Jessica drove that day was a standard Amazon delivery vehicle, equipped with the company's state-of-the-art Rabbit tracking system that monitored every aspect of a driver's performance. The technology was sophisticated beyond what most people realized, capable of tracking not just location and speed, but also engine status, door openings, and even periods of idling. Every package scan was time-stamped and GPS coordinated, creating a digital breadcrumb trail that should have made it impossible for anyone to simply vanish. Jessica's personal life, by all accounts, was stable and unremarkable in the best possible way. She shared a modest 2-bedroom apartment with her roommate Sarah Martinez, whom she had known since high school. The two women had developed a comfortable routine over the years, with Jessica handling the groceries and household management while Sarah, who worked nights as a registered nurse, took care of the cleaning and laundry. Their friendship was the kind built on mutual respect and complementary schedules rather than dramatic bonding experiences. Sarah would later describe Jessica as someone who approached life with quiet determination rather than flashy ambition. Jessica had been working toward completing her bachelor's degree in business administration through online courses, taking 1 or 2 classes per semester while maintaining her demanding delivery schedule. She had talked frequently about eventually moving into logistics management, possibly with Amazon itself, viewing her current position as valuable experience rather than a dead-end job. The delivery route Jessica had been assigned that December morning was one she had worked many times before. Willowbrook Estates was a gated community of executive homes and luxury condominiums, the kind of neighborhood where residents ordered everything from Amazon, from everyday household items to expensive electronics and jewelry. The packages that day included the usual mix of holiday gifts, home goods, and last-minute purchases that characterized the peak shipping season. According to the delivery manifesto, Jessica's van contained 847 packages when she left the station at 7:30 that morning. The first several hours of her route proceeded exactly as expected. GPS tracking showed her making stops at the appropriate intervals, scanning packages, and updating delivery statuses in real time. Doorbell cameras from multiple homes captured footage of Jessica working her way through the neighborhood, appearing relaxed and professional as she carried packages to front doors and confirmed deliveries through her handheld scanner. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a 73-year-old retired teacher who lived on Magnolia Circle, would become the last person to see Jessica Taylor alive. Mrs. Whitman had been expecting a package containing prescription medications and had been watching from her living room window when Jessica's van pulled up to her house at approximately 2:15 that afternoon. She later told police that Jessica had seemed perfectly normal, perhaps even cheerful, as she approached the front door with the package. The delivery had been routine in every way. Jessica had rung the doorbell, waited for Mrs. Whitman to answer, and handed over the package with a smile and a wish for happy holidays. Mrs. Whitman had signed for the delivery on Jessica's electronic pad, and they had exchanged a few words about the unusually warm weather for December. The entire interaction had lasted less than 3 minutes, and Mrs. Whitman had watched Jessica walk back to her van, climb into the driver's seat, and drive away toward the next stop on her route. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jessica Taylor. The first indication that something was wrong came approximately 4 hours later when Jessica failed to complete her scheduled return to the delivery station. Amazon's automated systems began generating alerts when her van remained stationary for longer than the prescribed break periods allowed. By 6:30 p.m., when Jessica was more than 2 hours overdue for her end-of-shift check-in, Supervisor David Morrison initiated the company's missing driver protocol. Morrison's first step was to attempt radio contact with Jessica through the van's communication system. When those calls went unanswered, he tried calling her personal cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. The GPS tracking system showed Jessica's van as stationary in a location that didn't correspond to any address on her delivery route. Positioned in what appeared to be an empty lot several miles from Willowbrook Estates, the Amazon security team was notified within minutes, and they immediately began attempting to establish remote contact with the van's onboard systems. What they discovered was puzzling. The vehicle's engine was off, but all other systems appeared to be functioning normally. The GPS tracker was transmitting a clear signal. The doors showed as closed and locked, and there were no error codes or distress signals being generated by any of the van's monitoring equipment. By 7:15 p.m., Amazon Security had contacted the Riverside Police Department to report a missing employee. Officer Jennifer Rodriguez was dispatched to investigate, arriving at the GPS coordinates at 7:45 p.m. What she found there would deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Jessica's delivery van was parked in a small clearing beside a rarely used access road that led to a cluster of older commercial buildings. The van was locked, with no signs of damage or forced entry. Through the windows, Officer Rodriguez could see that the van's cargo area was still fully loaded with packages, hundreds of parcels still wrapped and labeled for delivery. Jessica's personal belongings, including her purse, cell phone, and the jacket she had been wearing that morning, were nowhere to be seen. The van's electronic log showed that the engine had been turned off at 3:27 p.m., approximately 70 minutes after Jessica had completed her delivery to Mrs. Whitman. There was no record of any additional package scans or delivery attempts after that final confirmed stop. It was as if Jessica had simply driven to this remote location, turned off the engine, and vanished into the winter afternoon. Police immediately began canvassing the area around where the van was found, looking for any witnesses who might have seen Jessica or her vehicle. The access road was seldom traveled, bordered on one side by an abandoned industrial complex and on the other by undeveloped woodland. A few truckers who regularly used the main highway nearby were interviewed, but none recalled seeing an Amazon delivery van or a young woman matching Jessica's description. The abandoned industrial complex drew particular attention from investigators. The facility had once housed a furniture manufacturing company that had closed several years earlier, leaving behind a collection of empty warehouses and office buildings. The property was officially owned by a development company that had plans to convert it into mixed-use commercial space, but those plans had been stalled in permit processes for months. The buildings stood empty and largely unsecured, making them potential hiding places or crime scenes. Detective Maria Santos, who had been assigned as the lead investigator on Jessica's case, spent hours walking through the abandoned complex with a team of officers and search dogs. They found evidence of occasional trespassing by local teenagers and homeless individuals, but nothing that seemed connected to Jessica's disappearance. The buildings were dusty and undisturbed, with no recent footprints or signs of struggle. The search expanded to include the surrounding woodland, with volunteer searchers joining police and fire department personnel in combing through acres of dense forest. They were looking for any trace of Jessica or her belongings, any indication of where she might have gone after parking her van. The search continued for 3 days, involving nearly 200 volunteers and covering a radius of several miles around the location where the van was found. Nothing was discovered. Jessica's family was notified of her disappearance on the evening she failed to return from work. Her parents, Robert and Linda Taylor, drove immediately to Riverside from their home in a neighboring county, arriving at the police station after midnight to meet with Detective Santos. The Taylors were a close-knit family, and Jessica's disappearance was completely out of character for their responsible, dependable daughter. Robert Taylor, a retired machinist, told investigators that Jessica had called him just 3 days earlier to discuss Christmas plans. She had seemed happy and excited about the upcoming holiday, making arrangements to spend Christmas Eve with her parents and her younger sister's family. Linda Taylor, who worked as a school administrator, emphasized that Jessica was not the type of person to disappear without explanation, especially not during the holiday season when she knew her family would be worried. The investigation into Jessica's personal life revealed no obvious motives for her disappearance. She had no history of mental health issues, no romantic relationships that might have turned problematic, and no financial difficulties that might have driven her to desperation. Her bank accounts showed normal activity patterns, with no unusual withdrawals or suspicious transactions. Her credit cards had not been used since the morning of her disappearance, when she had purchased coffee and a breakfast sandwich at a convenience store near the Amazon facility. Sarah Martinez, Jessica's roommate, provided investigators with detailed information about Jessica's routine and state of mind in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sarah emphasized that Jessica had been looking forward to the end of peak season, when her delivery schedule would become less demanding and she could focus more attention on her college coursework. Jessica had recently completed a business management course with an A grade and was excited about registering for her next semester of classes. Amazon's corporate security team launched their own parallel investigation, working closely with local police, but also conducting internal reviews of Jessica's employment history and work performance. The company's investigation was thorough and professional, but it was also clearly motivated by concerns about liability and public relations. Amazon was dealing with increased scrutiny about driver safety and working conditions, and Jessica's disappearance had the potential to become a significant public relations problem. The internal investigation revealed that Jessica had been an exemplary employee throughout her 2 years with the company. Her performance reviews were consistently positive, her safety record was spotless, and she had never been involved in any workplace conflicts or disciplinary actions. Her supervisors described her as reliable, professional, and well-liked by her colleagues. There was nothing in her employment record that suggested any problems or concerns. However, the investigation did reveal some interesting details about the specific route Jessica had been working on the day she disappeared. Route 447 was considered one of the most desirable assignments at the facility, not just because of the affluent neighborhood it served, but because it typically involved delivering high-value packages that generated better tips and customer satisfaction ratings. The route was usually assigned to the station's most experienced and trusted drivers. David Morrison, the supervisor who had been responsible for route assignments that week, explained that Jessica had been specifically requested for Route 447 by several customers who had been pleased with her service on previous deliveries. This kind of customer loyalty was valuable to Amazon, and the company encouraged supervisors to accommodate such requests when possible. Morrison had been happy to assign Jessica to the route, viewing it as recognition of her excellent work performance. The packages that remained in Jessica's van after her disappearance were carefully cataloged and examined by investigators. The cargo represented a typical cross-section of holiday orders, ranging from inexpensive household items to electronics and jewelry worth several $1,000s. Several of the packages were overnight or expedited deliveries, suggesting that customers were counting on receiving them in time for Christmas celebrations. Amazon's customer service team had the difficult task of contacting the affected customers to explain the situation and arrange for replacement deliveries. Most customers were understanding and concerned about Jessica's well-being, but a few were angry about the inconvenience and demanded immediate resolution. The company handled these interactions with professional diplomacy, But the situation created additional stress for employees who were already dealing with the emotional impact of their colleague's disappearance. The investigation took an interesting turn when Detective Santos decided to interview other Amazon drivers who had worked similar routes in the same area. She was looking for any patterns or unusual occurrences that might provide clues about what had happened to Jessica. What she discovered was a series of minor incidents that, when viewed together, suggested something more significant might have been occurring in the area. Three other drivers reported having experienced what they described as weird feelings while working routes in and around Willowbrook Estates during the weeks leading up to Jessica's disappearance. Marcus Rodriguez, a driver with 5 years of experience, mentioned that he had noticed several occasions when it seemed like packages were being watched or followed. He couldn't point to anything specific, but he had developed a sense that someone was paying unusual attention to high-value deliveries in the area. Another driver, Patricia Williams, reported that she had been approached by someone claiming to be a homeowner who wanted to intercept a package delivery for a neighbor who was out of town. The interaction had felt strange to Patricia, and she had refused to release the package to anyone other than the addressee. When she had mentioned the incident to her supervisor, she had been told that such requests were not uncommon during the holiday season and that she had handled it correctly by following protocol. These reports were intriguing but not conclusive. Detective Santos recognized that the high-stress environment of peak season delivery work could make drivers more sensitive to unusual situations, and it was possible that the incidents were unrelated to Jessica's disappearance. However, she made detailed notes about each report and added them to the growing case file. The investigation expanded to include interviews with residents of Willowbrook Estates, particularly those who had been expecting deliveries on December 19th. Most had been understanding about the delayed packages, but several mentioned that they had been experiencing what seemed like an unusually high rate of package theft in recent months. Items were being reported as delivered but never received, or packages were disappearing from doorsteps within minutes of being dropped off. Mrs. Catherine Henderson, who lived on Oak Ridge Drive, told investigators that she had lost 3 packages in the past month, all containing electronics or jewelry. The items had been marked as delivered by the tracking system, but she had never received them. When she had contacted Amazon's customer service, she had been told that the packages must have been stolen after delivery and that replacement items would be sent. Mrs. Henderson had been satisfied with Amazon's response, but she had found the frequency of thefts to be unusual. Similar reports came from other residents, creating a pattern that Detective Santos found increasingly concerning. The thefts seemed to be targeting specific types of high-value merchandise, and they were occurring at a rate that suggested more than random opportunistic crime. Someone appeared to have detailed knowledge of what was being delivered where and when. This revelation led Detective Santos to request additional information from Amazon about their delivery tracking and customer service records for the Willowbrook Estates area. What she discovered was troubling. Over the past 6 months, the area had experienced a significant increase in reports of undelivered packages, with most of the missing items being electronics, jewelry, or other high-value merchandise. The pattern was subtle enough that it hadn't triggered any internal alarms at Amazon, but when viewed as a whole, it suggested systematic theft rather than random crime. The detective began to consider the possibility that Jessica's disappearance might be connected to whatever was happening with the missing packages. If someone was systematically stealing high-value deliveries in the area, Jessica might have discovered something that made her a threat to their operation. It was a theory that made sense, but proving it would require more evidence than the investigation had uncovered so far. Christmas came and went with no word from or about Jessica Taylor. Her family held a small, somber gathering that was supposed to have included her, leaving an empty chair at the dinner table and spending much of the day calling friends and posting on social media in hopes that someone might have information about her whereabouts. The local media covered the story sporadically, but without new developments, public attention began to fade. Amazon issued a statement expressing concern for Jessica's well-being and emphasizing the company's cooperation with law enforcement. The statement mentioned that Amazon had implemented additional safety protocols for drivers working in the area and was reviewing its procedures for handling missing employee situations. The company also announced a reward for information leading to Jessica's safe return, though the amount was not disclosed. The investigation continued through the winter and into the spring, but progress was slow. Detective Santos pursued every lead and followed up on every tip, but none of them provided breakthrough information. Jessica's cell phone remained disconnected, her bank accounts showed no activity, and there were no credible sightings of her anywhere in the region. It was as if she had simply stepped out of the world. Sarah Martinez struggled with her roommate's disappearance in ways that surprised her. She had always thought of herself as emotionally resilient, but Jessica's absence created a constant undercurrent of anxiety and sadness that affected every aspect of her daily life. The apartment felt empty and wrong without Jessica's organized presence, and Sarah found herself unable to concentrate on her nursing work or maintain her usual social connections. The financial impact was significant as well. Jessica had been responsible for half the rent and utilities, and her disappearance left Sarah scrambling to cover the full cost of the apartment. She considered moving to a smaller place, but the lease still had several months remaining, and she was reluctant to give up the home she had shared with Jessica. There was something that felt like abandonment about leaving the place where Jessica might try to return. Jessica's parents, Robert and Linda Taylor, established a routine of driving to Riverside every weekend to meet with Detective Santos and check on the progress of the investigation. These meetings were often brief and discouraging, but they provided the family with a sense of doing something active rather than simply waiting for news. Robert Taylor, in particular, struggled with feeling helpless and spent hours walking through the area where Jessica's van had been found, hoping to discover something that the official searches had missed. The Taylors also worked with local media to keep Jessica's story visible, participating in interviews and providing photographs for news stories. They created a Facebook page dedicated to finding Jessica and shared regular updates about the investigation. The page attracted followers from around the country, including other families who had experienced similar disappearances, creating a small community of people united by loss and uncertainty. As months passed, the investigation began to shift from an active missing person case to a cold case review. Detective Santos continued to work on Jessica's disappearance, but she was also assigned new cases that required immediate attention. The reality of police work was that resources had to be allocated based on the likelihood of achieving results, and Jessica's case had reached a point where significant new evidence would be needed to justify intensive investigation efforts at Amazon's internal investigation also wound down, though the company maintained that it remained committed to cooperating with law enforcement and supporting Jessica's family. The route assignments for Willowbrook Estates were redistributed among other drivers, and new safety protocols were implemented across the entire facility. David Morrison, the supervisor who had been responsible for Jessica's route assignments, was transferred to a different position within the company, though Amazon maintained that the transfer was unrelated to Jessica's disappearance. The summer of 2020 brought new challenges for everyone involved in Jessica's case. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted normal life and shifted public attention away from cases like Jessica's disappearance. Detective Santos found herself dealing with increased domestic violence calls and other pandemic-related crimes, while Jessica's family struggled with the additional stress of health concerns and economic uncertainty. The pandemic also affected Amazon's operations significantly, with massive increases in delivery volume and changes to safety protocols that transformed the work environment Jessica had known. New drivers were hired to handle the increased demand, and many of the people who had worked with Jessica were reassigned or left the company entirely. The institutional memory of her disappearance began to fade as turnover increased and priorities shifted. However, the pandemic also brought unexpected developments in the investigation. With more people working from home and spending time in their neighborhoods, there was increased awareness of delivery activities and package security. Several Willowbrook Estates residents reported suspicious behavior around package deliveries, including individuals who seemed to be monitoring delivery routes and timing their activities to coincide with driver schedules. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, who had been the last person to see Jessica, called Detective Santos in August 2020 to report that she had observed what appeared to be coordinated package theft in her neighborhood. She had been watching from her window when an Amazon delivery driver had left a package at a house across the street. Within minutes, someone had approached the house, taken the package, and driven away in a van that Mrs. Whitman didn't recognize as belonging to any of the neighbors. When Mrs. Whitman had called the homeowner to report the theft, she had been told that the package had actually been delivered correctly and that there was no problem. This confused Mrs. Whitman, who was certain she had seen the package being stolen. When she had pressed for details, the homeowner had become evasive and ended the conversation quickly. Detective Santos was intrigued by Mrs. Whitman's report and decided to investigate further. She contacted the homeowner directly, identifying herself as a police officer investigating package theft in the area. The homeowner, a man named Thomas Bradley, initially claimed that there had been no problem with his deliveries, but when pressed for details, his story became inconsistent and evasive. Further investigation revealed that Thomas Bradley was not actually the homeowner at that address. The house was owned by a family named Morrison who were traveling abroad for an extended period and had arranged for a house-sitting service to maintain the property. Thomas Bradley worked for that service, but he had no authority to receive packages on behalf of the homeowners. This discovery led Detective Santos to examine the house-sitting service more closely. The company, called Premium Property Management, had been operating in the area for about a year and specialized in maintaining high-end homes for wealthy clients who traveled frequently. The service was legitimate and properly licensed, but some of its employees appeared to have been taking advantage of their access to handle package deliveries inappropriately. The connection between Premium Property Management and the missing packages in Willowbrook Estates was not immediately clear, but Detective Santos sensed that she was getting closer to understanding what had been happening in the area around the time of Jessica's disappearance. The timing was significant. Premium Property Management had begun operating in the neighborhood about 6 months before Jessica had vanished, which coincided with the increase in reported package thefts. Detective Santos decided to conduct surveillance of Premium Property Management's operations, working with other officers to monitor the company's employees as they went about their duties in Willowbrook Estates. What they observed was a pattern of behavior that raised significant concerns about the company's legitimacy and the activities of some of its workers. Several employees were observed entering homes they were supposed to be house-sitting and leaving with packages that had been delivered during the homeowner's absence. The packages were not being forwarded to the homeowners or stored securely. Instead, they were being loaded into personal vehicles and driven away. The behavior suggested systematic package theft rather than legitimate house-sitting services. The investigation into Premium Property Management revealed connections to several individuals with criminal histories involving theft and fraud. The company's owner, Michael Santos, had previously been convicted of insurance fraud and had served probation for operating a fraudulent moving company. Several of the company's employees had records for theft, burglary, and other property crimes. Detective Santos obtained warrants to search Premium Property Management's offices and several of the properties they were managing. The searches revealed evidence of a sophisticated package theft operation that had been running for months. The company had been using their legitimate access to high-end homes to intercept valuable packages, replacing them with empty boxes or worthless items before homeowners returned from their travels. The operation was more complex than simple theft. The criminals had been monitoring Amazon's delivery tracking systems to identify high-value packages being delivered to homes where they had access. They would intercept the packages, remove the valuable contents, and reseal the boxes with worthless substitutes. When homeowners returned and discovered the problem, they would typically assume the theft had occurred after delivery and would file claims with Amazon for replacement items. This scheme had been generating thousands of dollars in stolen merchandise every month while avoiding detection by appearing to be random package theft rather than systematic crime. The criminals had been careful to avoid patterns that might trigger investigation, rotating their activities among different properties and limiting their thefts to avoid suspicion. The discovery of the package theft operation was significant, but it still didn't explain what had happened to Jessica Taylor. Detective Santos believed there was a connection, but proving it would require additional evidence and investigation. The criminals who had been arrested were not cooperative, claiming they had no knowledge of Jessica's disappearance and denying any involvement in her case. However, one detail from the Premium Property Management investigation would prove to be crucial. Among the evidence seized from the company's offices were delivery route maps and schedules that had been used to plan their theft operations. These documents showed detailed knowledge of Amazon's delivery procedures and timing, including specific information about Route 447, the route Jessica had been working on the day she disappeared. The route maps indicated that the criminals had been particularly interested in Route 447 because it served the wealthiest area of Willowbrook Estates and typically included high-value package deliveries. They had been monitoring the route for weeks, tracking delivery patterns, and identifying the most profitable targets for their theft operation. The level of detail in their planning suggested they had inside information about Amazon's delivery operations. This revelation led Detective Santos to re-examine Amazon's internal investigation of Jessica's disappearance. She requested additional information about the employees who had access to route planning and delivery schedules, particularly those who would have known about the high-value packages being delivered on Route 447. The investigation had already established that several Amazon employees had been questioned about Jessica's disappearance, but the focus had been on whether they had seen anything suspicious rather than whether they might have been involved in criminal activity. The detectives' renewed investigation of Amazon's internal operations revealed troubling inconsistencies in the statements provided by several employees during the original investigation. David Morrison, the supervisor who had been responsible for route assignments, had initially told investigators that he had assigned Jessica to Route 447 because of customer requests and her excellent performance record. However, further questioning revealed that Morrison had actually been specifically instructed to ensure that Jessica worked that route on December 19th. When pressed for details about who had given him these instructions, Morrison became evasive and claimed he couldn't remember the exact circumstances. His explanations were inconsistent and didn't align with Amazon's standard procedures for route assignments. Detective Santos sensed that Morrison was hiding something significant about the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. The thorough review of Morrison's employment history revealed several concerning details. He had previously worked for a logistics company that had been investigated for cargo theft, though he had not been personally charged with any crimes. His financial records showed several large cash deposits that he couldn't adequately explain, and his lifestyle appeared to exceed what would be expected from his Amazon salary. Detective Santos obtained warrants to search Morrison's home and financial records more thoroughly. The search revealed evidence that Morrison had been receiving payments from Premium Property Management for providing information about high-value package deliveries. Text messages on his phone showed communications with Michael Santos, the owner of the property management company, discussing delivery schedules and package contents. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been operating as an inside source for the package theft operation, providing detailed information about valuable deliveries so that the criminals could target them effectively. He had been receiving a percentage of the profits from the stolen merchandise, earning several $1,000s over the months the operation had been running. That Morrison's involvement explained how the criminals had been able to operate so effectively. With inside information about delivery schedules and package contents, they had been able to target specific high-value items while avoiding detection. Morrison had been careful to provide information that would allow the thefts to appear random rather than systematic, protecting both himself and the criminal operation. However, the investigation still hadn't established a direct connection between Morrison's criminal activities and Jessica's disappearance. Detective Santos believed that Jessica must have discovered something about the theft operation, but proving what had happened to her would require additional evidence. The criminals who had been arrested continued to deny any knowledge of Jessica's fate, and Morrison was not cooperating with the investigation. The case remained frustratingly incomplete despite the significant progress that had been made in understanding the criminal operation. Detective Santos had established that Jessica had been working a route that was being systematically targeted by criminals who had inside information from her supervisor, but she still couldn't prove what had happened to Jessica on December 19th. 2019. That the investigation continued through 2021 and into 2022, with Detective Santos pursuing every possible lead and following up on all tips related to Jessica's disappearance. The case had attracted renewed media attention following the arrests related to the package theft operation, and several true crime podcasts and television programs had featured Jessica's story. The increased publicity generated new tips and possible sightings, but none of them led to breakthrough information. Jessica's family continued their efforts to keep her story visible and to support the investigation. They organized anniversary events on the date of her disappearance and worked with missing person advocacy groups to raise awareness of cases like Jessica's. Robert and Linda Taylor had become knowledgeable about missing person investigations and often served as resources for other families dealing with similar situations. The emotional toll of the prolonged uncertainty was significant for everyone involved. Sarah Martinez had eventually moved to a smaller apartment, unable to continue paying for the place she had shared with Jessica. She had kept Jessica's belongings in storage, hoping that her friend would eventually return to claim them. The decision to move had been difficult, but it was necessary for her financial stability and mental health. Amazon had implemented additional security measures and oversight procedures in response to the package theft investigation, but the company continued to face scrutiny about its employee screening and supervision practices. The case had highlighted vulnerabilities in the company's operations that could be exploited by criminals, leading to policy changes and increased security awareness. As 2022 progressed, Detective Santos began to consider the possibility that Jessica's case might never be fully resolved. She had exhausted most of the investigative leads and had not uncovered evidence that definitively explained what had happened to Jessica. The package theft operation had been dismantled and the criminals involved had been prosecuted, but Jessica herself remained missing. The detective had seen many cases like this during her career, investigations that revealed significant criminal activity but never provided complete answers about the specific victims who had drawn attention to the crimes. It was one of the most frustrating aspects of police work, the reality that justice was often incomplete and that some questions would never be answered. However, Detective Santos was not ready to give up on Jessica's case entirely. She continued to review the evidence periodically, looking for details that might have been missed or connections that hadn't been explored. She also stayed in contact with Jessica's family, providing updates on any new developments and maintaining their hope that answers might eventually be found. The breakthrough that would finally solve Jessica's case came from an unexpected source. In September 2022, nearly 3 years after Jessica's disappearance, a group of urban explorers decided to investigate the abandoned industrial complex near where Jessica's delivery van had been found. The explorers were documenting empty buildings for a photography project and had obtained permission from the property owners to access the facility. The group consisted of 4 college students who were interested in urban decay and abandoned architecture. They had been exploring similar sites for several months, creating a social media following for their photography and videos of forgotten industrial spaces. The abandoned complex had been on their list of potential locations for some time, but they had been waiting for cooler weather before attempting the extensive exploration the site would require. The students, Marcus Thompson, Ashley Chun, David Rodriguez, and Emily Watson, arrived at the complex on a Saturday morning in late September, equipped with professional photography equipment and safety gear appropriate for exploring potentially dangerous abandoned buildings. They had researched the site's history and were aware that it had been searched in connection with Jessica Taylor's disappearance, but they were not expecting to discover anything related to that case. The complex consisted of several large warehouse buildings and a smaller office structure, all of which had been vacant for several years. The students began their exploration with the office building, documenting the abandoned workspaces and examining the industrial equipment that had been left behind when the furniture company had closed. The building was in poor condition, with broken windows, water damage, and clear signs of previous trespassing. After spending several hours in the office building, the group moved to the largest warehouse structure. The building was enormous, with high ceilings and vast open spaces that had once housed manufacturing equipment. The students were impressed by the scale of the space and spent considerable time setting up shots that would capture the dramatic lighting and architectural details. It was Emily Watson who made the discovery that would change everything. She had been exploring a section of the warehouse that was partially separated from the main floor by concrete barriers and industrial shelving. The area appeared to have been used for storage or specialized manufacturing processes, and it was more cluttered with abandoned equipment and materials than other parts of the building. Emily was photographing some interesting graffiti on one of the concrete walls when she noticed something unusual partially hidden behind a stack of metal shelving units. What she saw made her call immediately for her companions to join her. Wedged behind the shelving, covered with dust and debris but still recognizable, were several items that appeared to be personal belongings, including what looked like a woman's purse and clothing. The students immediately recognized the potential significance of their discovery and made the decision to contact police rather than investigating further on their own. Marcus Thompson used his cell phone to call 911, reporting that they had found what might be evidence related to the Jessica Taylor missing person case. The dispatcher instructed them to leave the area undisturbed and wait for officers to arrive. Detective Santos received the call about the discovery while she was working on an unrelated case. When she heard that urban explorers had found personal belongings in the abandoned warehouse complex, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The location was significant. The complex had been searched thoroughly during the initial investigation of Jessica's disappearance, but it was possible that something had been missed or that evidence had been moved there after the original searches. Detective Santos arrived at the warehouse within 30 minutes of receiving the call, accompanied by several other officers and forensic technicians. The urban explorers were waiting outside the building and provided detailed information about exactly where they had made their discovery. Emily Watson led the officers to the location behind the metal shelving where she had spotted the personal belongings. What the forensic team discovered was more extensive than the students had initially realized. Behind the shelving units, partially concealed by industrial materials and debris, was a collection of items that appeared to have been deliberately hidden. The items included a woman's purse, clothing, a cell phone, and several other personal belongings. Most significantly, they also found Jessica's Amazon delivery scanner and GPS tracking device, equipment that had been missing from her van when it was discovered. The discovery of the GPS tracking device was particularly significant because it provided concrete evidence connecting the location to Jessica's disappearance. The device was Amazon property that had been specifically assigned to Jessica for her delivery route on December 19, 2019. There was no legitimate reason for the device to have been separated from Jessica's van and hidden in the abandoned warehouse. Forensic examination of the items would take several days, but initial analysis confirmed that the purse and cell phone belonged to Jessica Taylor. The phone had been damaged, possibly deliberately, and would require specialized recovery techniques to extract any useful information from its memory systems. The clothing items were also identified as belonging to Jessica based on descriptions provided by her family and roommate. The location where the items were found was carefully documented and photographed before anything was removed for forensic analysis. The area behind the shelving units had clearly been used to conceal the items, but it was also apparent that they had been there for a considerable period of time. Dust and debris patterns suggested the items had been placed there months or possibly years earlier. Detective Santos was cautiously optimistic about the discovery, but she was also aware that finding Jessica's belongings did not necessarily mean that Jessica herself would be found. The items could have been placed in the warehouse by someone trying to dispose of evidence, and their discovery might not lead to information about Jessica's current whereabouts or what had happened to her. However, the discovery did provide new evidence that could potentially be used to confront the suspects who had been arrested in connection with the package theft operation. David Morrison, the Amazon supervisor who had been providing inside information to the criminals, had continued to maintain his innocence regarding Jessica's disappearance. The discovery of her GPS tracking device might provide leverage to obtain more truthful statements from Morrison and the other suspects. Detective Santos decided to approach Morrison with news of the discovery before the information became public through media coverage. She arranged to meet with Morrison and his attorney at the police station, presenting them with photographs of the items that had been found and asking for Morrison's explanation of how Jessica's equipment had ended up in the abandoned warehouse. To Morrison's response to the discovery was telling. He immediately became agitated and defensive, claiming that he had no knowledge of how Jessica's belongings had ended up in the warehouse. However, his explanations were inconsistent and his body language suggested that he was not being truthful. His attorney requested time to consult with his client privately before continuing the interview. During the consultation, Morrison's attorney, apparently advised him that the discovery of Jessica's belongings significantly strengthened the case against him, and that cooperation with investigators might be in his best interest. When the interview resumed, Morrison's demeanor had changed. Dramatically, he appeared resigned and emotionally exhausted, and he indicated that he was prepared to tell the truth about what had happened to Jessica Taylor. Morrison's confession would finally provide the answers that had eluded investigators for nearly 3 years. He admitted that he had been working with the package theft operation and that Jessica had discovered evidence of his involvement. On December 19, 2019, Jessica had noticed discrepancies in package inventory that suggested theft was occurring before packages even left the Amazon facility. She had begun asking questions that threatened to expose Morrison's criminal activities. According to Morrison's statement, Jessica had approached him that day with concerns about packages that were showing as loaded on her van, but were actually missing from her delivery route. She had noticed that several high-value items were listed on her delivery manifest, but were not physically present in her van when she began her route. Jessica had suspected that theft was occurring during the loading process and had intended to report her concerns to higher management. Morrison had initially tried to convince Jessica that she was mistaken and that the discrepancies were due to administrative errors that would be resolved by the end of her shift. However, Jessica had been persistent in her questions and had indicated that she planned to document the missing packages and report them to Amazon's loss prevention department. Morrison had realized that Jessica's report would likely trigger an investigation that would expose his involvement in the theft operation. According to Morrison's confession, he had convinced Jessica to meet him at the abandoned warehouse complex after her shift to discuss the situation further. He had told her that he had additional information about the missing packages that he wanted to share privately before any official reports were made. Jessica had agreed to the meeting, trusting Morrison as her supervisor and believing that he was trying to help resolve the situation. The meeting at the warehouse had not gone as Morrison had planned. Jessica had arrived expecting to receive information that would help her understand what was happening with the missing packages. However, Morrison had actually intended to convince her to keep quiet about her discoveries in exchange for a share of the profits from the theft operation. When Jessica had refused and had made it clear that she intended to report the thefts regardless of any personal consequences, Morrison had realized that she represented a serious threat to his criminal activities. Morrison's confession became increasingly difficult to follow as he described what had happened next. He claimed that he had not intended to hurt Jessica, but had become desperate when she had refused to cooperate with his attempts to silence her. According to his statement, there had been a physical struggle during which Jessica had been seriously injured. Morrison claimed that the injury had been accidental and that he had panicked when he realized how seriously Jessica had been hurt. Rather than calling for medical assistance, Morrison had made the decision to hide Jessica's belongings and try to cover up what had happened. He had taken her personal items, including her GPS tracking device, and hidden them in the warehouse before disposing of Jessica's body in a location he claimed he could no longer remember clearly. His story was confused and inconsistent regarding the specific details of Jessica's death and the disposal of her remains. Detective Santos was skeptical of Morrison's claims that Jessica's death had been accidental. The evidence suggested a more deliberate crime, and Morrison's evasiveness about the location of Jessica's body indicated that he was still not being completely truthful. However, his confession did provide confirmation that Jessica had been killed because of her discovery of the package theft operation, and it explained how her belongings had ended up in the abandoned warehouse. The confession also provided closure for Jessica's family, even though many questions remained unanswered. Robert and Linda Taylor had spent nearly 3 years wondering what had happened to their daughter, and while Morrison's confession was devastating, it also provided them with the truth they had been seeking. Jessica had not simply vanished or run away. She had been killed because she had tried to do the right thing by reporting criminal activity she had discovered. Morrison was charged with murder in connection with Jessica's death, and his trial provided additional details about the criminal operation that had led to her killing. The prosecution was able to demonstrate that Morrison had been systematically stealing packages and providing information to external criminals for months before Jessica's disappearance. The theft operation had generated significant profits, and Morrison had been living beyond his means as a result of his criminal income. The trial also revealed the extent of the corruption within Amazon's local operations. Several other employees had been aware of discrepancies in package inventory but had failed to report them or investigate further. The company's internal controls had been inadequate to prevent the systematic theft that Morrison had been facilitating, and Amazon faced significant criticism for its failure to protect both its customers and its employees. That Jessica's story became a catalyst for changes in how Amazon and other delivery companies handle security and employee oversight. The case highlighted the vulnerability of delivery drivers who might discover criminal activity and the need for better protection for employees who report suspicious behavior. Amazon implemented new procedures for handling inventory discrepancies and established better communication channels for employees to report concerns safely. The urban explorers who had discovered Jessica's belongings were recognized for their role in finally solving the case. Emily Watson, who had first spotted the hidden items, said that she had initially been excited about the discovery from a photography perspective, but had quickly realized the serious implications of what they had found. The group's decision to immediately contact police rather than investigating further on their own had been crucial to preserving the evidence and maintaining the integrity of the investigation. Detective Santos reflected on the case as one of the most complex and emotionally challenging investigations of her career. The discovery of the package theft operation had been satisfying from a law enforcement perspective, but the loss of Jessica Taylor remained a tragedy that could have been prevented if better systems had been in place to protect employees and detect criminal activity earlier. Jessica's family established a foundation in her memory to support families of missing persons and to advocate for better protection of workers who report criminal activity. The foundation provided resources for families dealing with missing person cases and worked to raise awareness of the dangers faced by employees who discover corruption in their workplaces. Sarah Martinez, Jessica's former roommate, struggled with the news of Morrison's confession and the confirmation that her friend had been murdered. While she had hoped for 3 years that Jessica might still be alive somewhere, she had also feared that something terrible had happened. The truth was devastating, but also provided a sense of closure that allowed her to begin processing her grief more completely. The case of Jessica Taylor's disappearance and murder became a subject of study for law enforcement agencies and security professionals interested in workplace crime and employee protection. The investigation had revealed how criminal activity within legitimate businesses could create dangerous situations for honest employees, and it had highlighted the importance of robust internal controls and reporting mechanisms. Morrison was ultimately convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His conviction provided legal closure to the case, but it could not bring Jessica back or undo the pain her loss had caused to her family and friends. The other members of the package theft operation received shorter sentences for their involvement in the criminal scheme, but Morrison's role in Jessica's death had made him the primary target of prosecution. Jessica's remains were never recovered despite extensive searches based on Morrison's vague descriptions of where he claimed to have disposed of her body. This remained a source of ongoing pain for her family, who wanted to be able to lay her to rest properly. Detective Santos continued to work with Morrison's attorneys to try to obtain more specific information about the location of Jessica's remains, but Morrison claimed that his memory of that night was unclear due to panic and stress. The case was officially closed with Morrison's conviction, but Jessica's story continued to resonate with people who heard about it through media coverage and true crime programs. Her death had occurred because she had tried to do the right thing, reporting criminal activity that she had discovered in her workplace. This aspect of the case made it particularly tragic and highlighted the risks faced by employees who speak up about corruption and illegal activity. The abandoned warehouse where Jessica's belongings had been found was eventually demolished as part of the development project that had been planned for the site. Before demolition began, Jessica's family was given the opportunity to visit the location and hold a private memorial service. The ceremony provided them with a sense of closure and allowed them to honor Jessica's memory in the place where the truth about her disappearance had finally been revealed. The investigation into Jessica Taylor's disappearance had taken nearly 3 years to resolve, but it had ultimately provided answers and justice for a young woman who had been killed for trying to report criminal activity. The case had exposed corruption within one of the world's largest companies and had led to changes in policies and procedures designed to better protect employees and customers. While Jessica's life could not be restored, her death had contributed to improvements that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Detective Santos would later say that Jessica's case had reminded her why she had chosen to become a police officer. Despite the frustration and setbacks of the investigation, the ultimate resolution had provided justice for a victim and closure for her family. The case had also demonstrated the importance of persistence in investigations and the value of never giving up on finding the truth, even when leads seemed to have been exhausted. The story of Jessica Taylor's disappearance and murder became a powerful reminder of the courage required to speak up about criminal activity and the importance of protecting those who do. Jessica had paid the ultimate price for her integrity, but her story had inspired others to report suspicious behavior and had contributed to systemic changes that might prevent similar tragedies. Her legacy was one of honesty, courage, and the pursuit of justice, even in the face of danger.